time in being so committed to taking advantage of the most essential right we have as Americans, the right to vote. A right that so many people who came before us hoped for, fought for, died for. A right that maybe we have taken for granted from time to time. A right that, as we should fully understand in this climate, we must fight to protect. What a program we have for you, including appearances from gubernatorial candidates Bob Ferguson and Dave Reichert, Attorney General candidates Nick Brown and Pete Serrano. Between their 15-minute appearances and afterward, SABJ board member Kevin Henry will lead a panel discussion with Crystal Fincher and Gregory Davis to give you the real about the issues that matter to us, locally and nationally, as we prepare our ballots. Special thank you to Kevin and Essex Porter, who is not here today, for the incredible effort it took to organize this event. I'd also like to recognize more members of our board: Liz Brazil, Tyra Majors, Vonnie Fair, Katie Hall, and Percy Allen. We appreciate the local media in the crowd, even though the Huskies and Wolverines are playing football right now. We'd also like to specifically celebrate the South Seattle Emerald and congratulate its wonderful staff and team of committed journalists. The Emerald recently celebrated its 10th birthday. Here's to many, many more anniversaries. That's enough for me. Love you all. Look forward to talking with you after.
Thank you, Jerry. I just wanted to remind people of some things that we were taking some questions on index cards. So if you had a question, I know Monet is out here somewhere. She was giving out index cards. So if you want to, you have a question that you want to possibly ask, if we have time permitting, please speak with Monet. Also, housekeeping. I think the bathrooms are in the back and to the right. And just a reminder, just that in this type of situation, it's just important to be respectful and be concise with your statements or questions, because we are kind of limited by time. But we, again, really appreciate you being here. So, without me going on anymore, I wanted to introduce our first speaker, who will speak for about 5 minutes, and then we'll take probably about 3 or 4 questions for Bob Ferguson. Bob Ferguson is here. Thank you very much for coming. Bob Ferguson is Washington State's 18th Attorney General. He's a graduate of the University of Washington and New York University Law School. And I did not know this, but he is an avid hiker and mountain climber as well. So let's have a big round of applause for Bob Ferguson.
Thank you. So I'll give you back 5 minutes to start. Right? Awesome. Thanks so much for that introduction, and I really appreciate the chance to be here with all of you and to the Seattle Association of Black Journalists for organizing this gathering. I really appreciate it. Looking forward to your questions, but I'll start by just saying for the past 12 years, I've had the honor of being your Attorney General, and during that time, it's been an honor to stand up for Washingtonians all across the state, fight for their rights and defend their freedoms, and being their advocate when powerful interests don't play by the rules. When I look at running for governor, what I think we need is a governor who understands we're facing many challenges as a state. We'll talk about those, I suspect. Public safety issues, affordability issues, homelessness issue. There are many challenges facing our state. We need a leader who's a change agent, who's demonstrated ability to be a change agent, to lean into those challenges, while also at the same time defending our core freedoms. And that's, I think, the essential qualification we need for our next governor. I also think as a government, we need to change the way we do business. I talk on my campaign trail all across the state. I've been to all 39 counties campaigning, listening to folks all across the state. And what I see in state government is often too much bureaucracy that gets in the way of centering the people of the state of Washington in the work that we do. But there's a reason why I'm the only person running for governor does not accept any campaign donations from large corporations or corporate PACs. Now, that's not the easy way to raise the many millions of dollars you need to raise to run a campaign for governor, but I'm trying to communicate to the people of the state of Washington that, hey, those big corporations, their voices are heard in Olympia when decisions are made. But your voices are not always front and center. When decisions are made by big agencies, or by governors, or by others. And so that's why we're running a people-powered grassroots campaign. And changing that bureaucracy is going to be important. But there are many issues we're facing as a state where bureaucracy gets in the way. I'll just give you one example, our education system. We have a great program in Washington State that assists Washingtonians with financial aid who want to go to college. Legislators done a great job of providing those resources for low-income kids to go to college and have that tuition paid for. There's one big problem. There's a form you need to fill out, okay, in order to access that financial aid. Just take that as in order to access that financial aid, pass this form. Washington State ranks, I think it's either last or next to last in the country for the number of high school students who complete this form that enables them to unlock all that financial aid. The Seattle Times did a huge article about this. Well, that's just an example of government not doing its job, right? As governor, I'll make sure we're getting in every single classroom, getting those forms in the hands of kids, communicating how important that is. And hey, for some kids, college is not where they want to go. We need more apprenticeship and on-the-job training programs. I have a TV ad up right now. It's with one of my 6 siblings. He's a machinist, talking about the importance of apprenticeship training, workforce development, and as governor, I'll do that. I'm proud to have a broad, diverse coalition endorsing my campaign. Mayors across the state, from Bruce Harrell here in Seattle to Lisa Brown in Spokane, endorse my campaign. Every newspaper that's been endorsed in this campaign has endorsed me. Just today, the Tri-State Herald, conservative part of the state, endorsed my campaign and praised my ability to work across the aisle. The Everett Herald, in the purple part of our state, endorsed my campaign as well. And so as a governor, what you'll see from me is making sure we're advocating for Washingtonians all across our state, making sure we're listening to all Washingtonians all across the state, and making sure we're centering you and your lives and the decisions that we make. I so appreciate the time. I'm going to wrap up a little bit early so I have a little extra time for the questions. But again, really appreciate all of you on a beautiful fall day to come out and talk about the future of our state. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so what we're going to do is we have some index cards. I'm going to read the questions. For Bob Ferguson, what will you do to improve educational outcomes for Black boys in Washington State?
Thanks so much for that question. So I touched briefly on education because I feel this is a part of state government that has not been doing a good enough job. I'll give you some specific examples. I gave you one already, right? That there are opportunities for kids all across our state who currently want to go to school but lack the financial resources to do so. And the state, again, has put into place the budget, the resources to help kids all across our state with financial aid to have that college experience paid for. But we are not getting the right information in front of those kids, right? Kids of all backgrounds. So that's now the key on to benefit all kids across our state. Number 2, we need to make sure as a state that we're investing in the right amount into our K-12 education. Right now, in the past several years, the percentage of our budget as a state, that goes to K-12 education has actually gone down in recent years. That needs to go up to provide more opportunities for kids all across our state. Third, the infrastructure of our schools. Too many schools, the infrastructure is not good enough. I support programs that'll be on the ballot you'll see today. Capital gains tax, for example, that provides funding for construction of schools, improving our actual physical schools. That's a contrast in this race. But if that capital gains tax is repealed, that's a huge hole in our budget. I want to maintain that revenue to make sure we're able to invest in our schools and our kids. It also includes funding for early learning, another important program for kids all across the state. I want to keep that funding and make sure we're investing in kids. Thanks for that question.
All right, thank you. Question number 2, you said 50 cents of each dollar of the state spending should go to public schools. How much additional funding would that mean? Do you believe legislators will support that?
Great question. So, and I would say, by the way, 50% is not necessarily a ceiling on that number, but that would represent an increase in where we are right now as a percent of our budget. I think the question went to, hey, do I think folks would support that in the state legislature? That's a good question. I think what I would say is I'm optimistic. The reason I'm optimistic is because it's a bipartisan issue. And traveling across the state, this is an issue I hear all across the state. When I was in Republic, Washington, for example, right? The people in Republic, Washington, pretty conservative part of our state, when they talk about schools, they talk about the failing infrastructure of their school. The physical school is not good enough. So I think there's bipartisan support. Number two, look, I think anytime you do a budget, it can be a personal budget and a state budget, is you got to prioritize. And there's nothing more important that we have as a state than our kids, or the future of our state. And that is why I'm optimistic we can get this done as well. And third, what I would say I'm optimistic about is, as a governor, I'll be proposing that budget, so the starting point will be an increase. But also because I think that folks understand that, for us to succeed as a state, that investment in those kids will be critical, and the needs for kids in our schools has only grown. I don't want to go much longer in the interest of time, but just as an example, the number of special education students in our classrooms has gone up significantly in recent years. My late mother was a special education public school teacher. Mental health issues in our classroom. When I talk to educators across the state, they highlight the challenges of mental health issues in our state and the impact on the learning environment. So the needs in our education system have grown. So I guess I would say I'm optimistic that we'll get that increased funding for K-12 education.
All right, thank you. Third question, what strategies would you use to address the racial wealth gap?
Great question. So there's a great program that has not passed the legislature yet, but is one that I think has a lot of promise. It'll take me a minute to explain it, but it's something colloquially called baby bonds. Our state treasurer, Mike Plecciati, has proposed this idea. Other states are starting to do it. What essentially it is it takes the state, invests in every kid that's born, at a certain income level, a huge number of kids, and they invest and essentially create a bond for that kid. So that kid now grows up and becomes choose the age, 20, 22, 25, you can choose what age that is. Those bonds, of course, have grown in value significantly. So that individual, when they hit 25 years old, can now access those funds which have grown in those 25 years and use those funds for paying for their education, buying a home, starting a small business. It gets to that wealth disparity. My family was fortunate. My parents bought a home in 1960. That home appreciated over the years. As a result of that home, my mother, after my dad died, she was a school teacher, but she had a very comfortable retirement. Because that home provided her some very, very comfortable, for her retirement. She was able to pass on some resources to her 7 kids, despite being a public school teacher. That's something that benefited me and my kids. I can take those dollars and invest in theirs. I'm lucky, Not everyone was born with that privilege, and I understand that. Which is why having programs like baby bonds, which I support, I want to work with Mike Plecciati to get through the state legislature for investing in kids so they become young adults. That has grown for them. So to get to your question, that there is a resource there for them to start that business, to go to school, to buy that house, and help address those disparities that we're seeing.
Thank you. Got a few more questions.
A few more? Okay, good. I'm cruising through them, I guess. That's good.
Okay. Would you require students to complete the FAFSA to graduate, as many other states do?
Well, this is actually the form I was talking about earlier, so I guess I'd want to learn more about that as a requirement. I guess what I would say is, sure, I'm all for trying to get kids to fill out those forms, so I so appreciate where the audience was channeling my remarks earlier, talking about that form, because it doesn't come up very often. Not a lot of folks aren't aware of it. So that's an idea that other states have done, where it's an actual requirement. I'm all ears, because if kids fill that out, that unlocks so much financial aid for that young person. And so I know states like Connecticut, for example, I think they're at the top of the rung for getting kids to fill this out. So that's something that some states have done, whether it gets the school districts involved, get the classrooms involved, gets the teachers and the educators involved. I'm all for it. So whatever those ideas are, to make sure we're getting those forms in front of kids and filling them out. But I do want to underscore, hey, college is great for a lot of folks, but for other folks, that they want a different path. We need to make sure we're investing in those other paths as well, just like my brother who's a machinist, to make sure they have paths as well for those apprenticeships, for that workforce training. That's every bit as important.
Okay. What would you do to promote minorities and unity? If I vote for you, this might include policies to implement that would most directly benefit the BIPOC population in Washington State.
Yeah, thanks for that question. So I think your best indication of future performance is past action. And maybe I'll just take a minute here to mention when I became Attorney General, so we're the largest law firm in the state, 800 lawyers, we're a big operation. We do every kind of law you can imagine, and a lot you probably can't imagine. But when I became Attorney General in 2013, if you called our office with a civil rights complaint, we referred you somewhere else. Not one single solitary person in our entire law firm, 13 offices all around the state, hundreds of lawyers, no one did civil rights work on behalf of people. What's up with that, right? We're your law firm, we're the people's law firm, we should be doing that kind of work. So I set about trying to create a civil rights division that could advocate for all Washingtonians. Because let's admit it, let's face it, you're a farm worker, for example, and the company's mistreating you, what chance do you have to take on that company that's mistreating you, right? That civil rights division does not just exist, it's by any fair definition the best civil rights division in the country. I give you a lot of examples of what it does, but as one example was, a lot of folks face discrimination in housing. Let's say you have an old drug conviction on your record 15 years ago. A lot of landlords, when you check the box saying you've got a conviction, will simply not allow you, won't go any further. They won't give you a chance to get at housing. Even though law requires them to at least consider, what is that background? Is it just an old drug conviction from years ago? That's not gonna play to whether you can give it a 10, right? So my civil rights team did a whole undercover investigation of rental companies all across the state and held accountable those that were just saying no. When someone literally wrote saying, hey, I've got a 12-year-old drug conviction, I'm looking for housing. They just came back and said, no, you can't do it that way. So to your question, we try to really center all communities in the work that we do as a state, as an agency in the AG's office. And I think what you see from me as governor is exactly that same focus. To look where the state's not fulfilling its obligations for all Washingtonians, making sure we're advocating for all communities all across the state. I'm proud my civil rights division does that. I'm proud that my entire agency does that. And as a governor, that's even important as well. Maybe the other thing on that is, when I became Attorney General, the attorneys in our office, just being candid, was not a very diverse workforce, okay, the attorneys. Changed that. I got personally involved in how we hire. We changed the questions we ask in our interviews. I personally review hundreds of resumes, going through, hey, what's going on with our process? Why is this the way it's going? That's changed dramatically. The number of attorneys we have who are diverse has gone up dramatically in my time as Attorney General. That's changed the culture of our office internally, because I understand the legal advice we give to state clients, which is very important, or the work we do on behalf of you, that team should reflect the diversity of this state in the way we give that advice, and the decisions we do, and the cases we bring. And so having a governor who understands that and to lead on that is something I can bring to the table as well.
And you are done.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time to listen.
Thanks a lot.
Ferguson, I'm sorry, I have a question. I'm so sorry to interrupt. And it's very short. As a Black woman who has faced multiple layers of systemic neglect, retaliation, and discrimination from working from the executive office of the state, I've spent over 2 years being denied my right to file a legitimate complaint and have prevented further harm to marginalized people like myself. Despite repeated outreach to the state auditor's office and the Washington State Human Rights Commission and more, I've been met with obstruction, misinformation, and indifference. And it's not just me. Many others in vulnerable communities are facing similar barriers to justice. This is all happening under the existing administration. With all the promises of equity and transparency, how can you guarantee that under your leadership, marginalized people will not have to fight just to be heard, or in my case, drive almost 3 hours here?
Sorry, you learned that experience. Number 2, thanks for driving 3 hours. 3, I'm happy to give my personal information to my executive assistants. So it sounds like you're in the auditor's office and another state agency. So we do give legal advice to those agencies, so happy to give.
I don't work there anymore, I work for the governor's office.
So I'm happy to take that information. What I would say is your question is important. How would it be any different, right, from your experience? So I think I tried to touch on that up there, right, is you look at past performance. So looking at the office that we do, my office right now, realizing we're really paying civil rights for we have people calling our office with their own concerns. Hey, I'm being discriminated against in housing. What are you going to do? And we refer you somewhere else. Well, that's BS. Excuse my language, right? Or your law, right? We should be advocating for you. So I created that division, make sure we have a team that does that. That team is large. Does work all across the state of Washington. So I want to understand what's going on. I also talked about earlier the bureaucracy of state government. It sounds like you ran into that. I need to know more about the details, of course. I'm sorry that you had that experience. but that's an example of the state not being responsible.
I was an investigator in prisons, and I investigated permanent happened to incarcerated persons. I'm a whistleblower. And when it was going to embarrass the governor, I was removed. They slandered me, they lied about me. I'm previously incarcerated, I'm a recovering drug addict. Even without the designee, I still managed to report it to 2 of them. Nothing's happened. Nothing's happened. This led to a suicide attempt. I'm glad to be here today to be asking you, what's going on? Like, there needs to be answers. This isn't promotion. This isn't a lateral move or anything. This is a promotion, and I don't want this to happen to any.
I'm wondering, and excuse me for
Thank
a
you.
second. No, but I was hoping maybe could you continue the conversation just in the lobby so you can make sure that, you know, thank you very much. I appreciate your comments. I'm sorry, we're kind of pressed for time, but I'm hoping that they can have more of a productive conversation that will continue about the lobby. That's right. So next up, where is he? There he is, okay. You moved, that's what it is.
Well, I like to visit.
Okay, no, that's fine. Our next speaker is Dave Reichert. Dave Reichert is a retired police officer and King County Sheriff. He also served as U.S. Representative from Washington from 2005 to 2019. He served as the Sheriff of King County, Washington from 1997 to 2005. Let's have a round of applause for Dave Reichert.
Okay, I'm just gonna take a chance here that this might drop down. So I'll just grab it at the top. If I walk around, is that gonna really, it's gonna throw your camera off, isn't it? Okay, I'm kind of lazy. But I'm happy to be here. Is it afternoon? Yeah, I'm happy to be here this afternoon and got a chance to visit with some of you before the program started. My name is Dave Reichert. A little bit about myself so you know who you're voting for. I'm the oldest of 7. I grew up in the Renton Highlands, first in a duplex just off the Sunset Boulevard, and then in an 800 square foot cement block home with my 7 brothers and sisters, and my mother and father, so 9 of us in a 2-bedroom cement block home, 800 square feet, 1 bathroom, always slept in the garage. But back then, we didn't really know. We just, it was life, right? You just go on every day and you do it. I ran away from home when we moved to Kent because of domestic violence. I lived in a 1956 burglary. I joked that I wish I had that car today because I paid $200 for it when I bought it. In high school, it's probably worth about $30,000 today. I think there are a lot of us that have a little silver hair that wish we had our own car. I was fortunate. I was a little bit athletic, so in high school, I played football, basketball. The coach happened to see me play some football from Concordia Lutheran College in Oregon. They asked me to play. We didn't have any money. My grades were bad. I was dyslexic too, by the way. And so they said, I'll pay your tuition, pay your books, and we'll also get you a job on campus. And so I got 2 years of college that way. Met my wife at Concordia Lutheran. We've been married 54 years. We have 3 kids and 6 grandkids and 5 great-grandchildren, 6th great-grandchild on the way. We now live between Auburn and Chelan, or in the town of Chelan, I should say. I was hired on the sheriff's office in 1972. I worked the jail, I worked patrol. I had 2 valor awards. I was here to the state attorney general's award for greatest action. Had my throat slit with a butcher knife at a domestic violence call, which I was very familiar with growing up. Saved the wife from being killed, but got into a little bit of a knife fight with the guy who was trying to kill his wife. I did 33 years in the sheriff's office, and you might remember my name or know my name from the Green River Task Force days. At 32 years old, I was assigned the first body in the Green River case. For 9 years, I collected scores of bodies of little girls, I saw the 2 men in suit threw me off. Little girls and young women. When I was a sheriff, I reopened that case, and we solved it in 2001. I left the sheriff's office in 2005, went to Congress for 14 years. It was not my plan to be an elected member of Congress. It just sort of happened. If you had questions about how I ended up in politics, it was a totally a fluke deal, but God has a plan. I left Congress in 2019, and I ended up working in Central America doing trafficking because of the Green River and my connection to some foreign governments. So I spent 5 years doing that. Last year, when Governor Inslee decided to retire, my phone was ringing off the hook, and I got lots of 1 minute. And I got lots of calls and emails. Dave, would you run for governor? And so July of last year, decided to run for governor. I think there just needs to be a change. I'm just a guy from the Brent Islands, kid right in high school, but I know how to solve problems. God has blessed me with the career that I've had, and blessed me to be in this room with you today, to talk about the things that are important to you. And hopefully together, we can find the answers. 30 seconds and I'll use those for questions. Thank you for listening to my story.
Stay there.
I will.
You've got some questions, and
I know you're in charge.
Monet, actually Monet is in charge.
Who's in charge?
Monet is.
Oh, Monet. Yeah, Sue's in charge in my office, so we don't have bosses, yeah.
All right, let's see. Question 1, will Washington State remain a safe state for women who seek abortion and health issues?
Oh, good.
Abortion-related health issues.
Yes. So yes, I am so happy whoever asked that question, because the ads that you see are false. I never voted for a national ban on abortion, never did. The 3 bills that I voted on in Congress all were, it was the viability of life, and it was 20 weeks. In Washington State, it's viability of life, and I think it's 24 weeks. So it's a very, very close law that exists. I will tell you that I'm pro-life, but I don't think the governor should be making this decision for the people of Washington State, and that's the Supreme Court's decision, that the people of Washington State make that decision. And my opponent also knows that the governor really has no power in the state to change that law. We've had an abortion law in Washington State since 1970, and it's been codified in law for many years after that, obviously, still in effect today. So now I'm running to be the governor to focus on the criminal justice system, the homelessness issue, which I have a lot of experience in those 2 things, being homeless myself and then also working with young girls on the street. And then also in the criminal justice system, obvious connection there. And then when you talk about the economy, my 14 years in Congress, chairing the Trade Committee, the Tax Committee, and the Human Resources Committee. Those are all, I think, things in my career that all line up to change what we've been experiencing for the last 40 years. We haven't had a Republican governor in Washington State for 40 years. And I think it's time to bring balance here to Washington State. So, you know, if I'm fortunate enough and blessed enough to get your votes, and we become governor, because it's the people that become governor, not just one person. It's not about me, it's about all of us, and that's why I'm doing this for my kids and grandkids and great-grandkids, but 40 years is enough. We have a Republican governor, we'll have a Democrat House, a Democrat Senate, so we'll have a balance there, and I think it will create an opportunity for us to have a conversation with people. We can show that we can talk to each other at the state level in government. I hope that that then filters down to the rest of our community, and we can respect each other for the differences that we have in our political opinions and others.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Will you support Superintendent Rector's request for $4 billion for funding for K-12 education? If not, what is your plan to address the state's need for school funding and the need for progressive reserve sources?
Were you holding it upside down too? So the question really is, how do we pay for education, right? And there is going to be a request for increased educational budget. But I think if you're looking for somebody to stand up here today and say, you know what, I know exactly what the answer to that question is, that we need X amount of dollars for education, I think you're looking for the wrong person. What I want to do, I want to be the investigator. I want to be the person who goes in and is the detective, so to speak, and looking at, okay, where's our money being spent in the education system? Is it really being spent on the priorities that we, all of us in this room, want? Is it being spent on education that really focuses on the things that our children need to know and learn to be successful members of the community? That's what I want to find out. Secondly, and we know there are shortages in the budget, especially for inner city schools, because property taxes, local property taxes have decreased as a result of people moving out, businesses moving out. That all ties to the criminal justice system and the reason for businesses moving and people moving. But I also want to take a look at things like, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, it was reported that $1 billion of COVID money to our state is missing. What happened to that $1 billion? I don't know, but I want to find out. There's also, about 3 weeks ago, there was a report that an individual within the state government was discovered as pilfering at least $1 million from the state treasury. The auditor said, I think there are other occasions that might be happening within our government too. So I think we need to really look at where the money is being spent, where the money has gone, and working together we can figure out how much we need to spend and where we need to spend.
All right, thank you. What can Washington State do to help create more affordable housing?
Yeah, boy, that is the question of the day. So I ran into, this happenstance, ran into about 6 or 7 young men walking through the parking lot in South Olympia the other day. And one of them was, am I doing okay? Okay, and one of them was looking for a house to buy, and I mentioned $500,000 average down there, and he said, no, it's actually, I looked for $500,000 home down in Olympia, $650,000. And so he's got to go to his parents and see if he can get a loan. There is a great program that's called the Covenant program that hopefully you've heard about that actually provides 20% down payment for underrepresented communities. So there's a 20% down, I would support this fully 100%. It's a 20%, the state government provides a 20% down payment for the house without interest on the loan, and then the loan is actually paid back when you sell the house. So with the money that you make on the house, you buy a $600,000 house, you stay in it for a while, you make some money on the house, then you can start to pay back the loan. So I think that's a great program, but there are other things that we can do too, and that is we've got to take a look at the zoning laws and the way that the state now is starting to get into city governments and county governments and telling them what they can do with their property and what can be developed on it. We also need to take a look at not just zoning laws, but all of the regulations attached to the building permits and the time it takes to getting a building permit. I think we need to speed up the process to get a building permit so that we can build more homes and commit to those building lower income homes.
And I think this will be the last question. You mentioned you served on the tax committee. Would you keep Washington income tax free?
Yes, I would. You know, the voters, and the reason I say yes to that, because the voters in Washington State, I think it's 7 or 9 times, lost track of the number, but we've always voted not to have an income tax. And that's why I would say yes, because it's what the people wanted. But if the people came to me and they said, hey, you know what, we think we need another tax structure in this state, I'd be willing and open-minded to talk. I used to be a hostage negotiator, by the way, so I'm happy to visit with people and negotiate. I think, if I could just, you don't have another question, can I just wrap up the whole thing? Yeah, go ahead. Okay, all right. This is what I want to do, ladies and gentlemen. I'm 74 years old. I was partially retired. I don't have to do this, but I want to do this. I want to do this for us. And here's what I want to do. I want to build a government that's based on servanthood. I'm tired of being the servant of the government. I don't know about you. I want the government to serve me. So there's 4 core values I instituted in the sheriff's office in 1997. They're still the core values of the King County Sheriff's Office today. Leadership, integrity, service, and teamwork. I want to build a government that's built on servanthood, where we have the heart of a servant, where we know we care about each other, and we're going to be honest with each other. Honesty's good. It's a moment in time, but we want to have consistent honesty. So we have integrity. So we have a government built on servanthood and a government built on integrity. Now, wouldn't that be something to be a part of? And then you have a team. You have a whole state that's built on those 2 core values. And then we become leaders. We become leaders. The state of Washington can start to set policies and change the direction that we're going. Because 40 years of of continually same ideas, this is why we are where we are today. When we win this governor's office, this will be historical in the state of Washington. 40 years since a Republican governor. But it'll also be historical for the entire country. And let's all be a part of that and create change. And let's work together where we can create a world where we all respect each other. We can sit down and visit and talk with each other and solve problems together, not based on ideology, but based on fact. Thank you guys for listening to me today.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Otherwise, I'll break that.
Okay, so I think we're only running about 4.5 minutes behind schedule. So the next segment will be about 15 minutes long, but if you go to 16 or 17, it's okay. I won't cut you off. So what we have here, I like to call them the commentators, because we have Crystal Finch and Gregory Davis here that will make some commentary and give you some commentary about what they've just heard, but also talk about some of the issues you feel are really important in this upcoming election. So to briefly introduce you, Crystal Fincher is the principal of Fincher Consulting, a full-service political consulting firm, and she also hosts the Hacks and Walks podcast. Woohoo! I love that name. And Gregory Davis is the managing strategist at the Rainier Beach Action Coalition and principal at Kismet Strategies. Yoo-hoo-hoo! So, I'm going to stand over here, and this is your segment, but did you want me to prompt you with a question, something that I thought of? Do you want to just get rolling? It's totally up to you.
I mean, I guess I can start. I think we heard some interesting things, starting with the issue of education funding. We heard a couple of different visions. Well, we heard different perspectives, right? I think that it is heartening to people who are concerned, families who are concerned about school closures, hearing a lot of troubling plans about closures, what that means. To hear Bob Ferguson say that he is advocating for additional funding, and he feels like there's an opportunity in the legislature. We also heard Dave Reichert basically say that he is really interested in drilling down into the questions and figuring that out. I guess my observation there would be, I think particularly in Seattle, voters sometimes have been burned by candidates who have said, we just need to ask the questions and get in office and then figure it out. And then that doesn't quite happen, or there's an agenda that's not there. I think that there is a demand for candidates when they decide to run, especially for governor, that they're coming with solutions rather than questions. I think lots of people have questions, but they're asking, okay, if you're taking on the responsibility, let's do that. I also think it was interesting, just on the issue of abortion rights, to hear the different perspective. And it's one that's very subjective, where Bob Ferguson, certainly as he mentioned, had attacked Dave Reichert for voting for a ban on abortion. And Dave characterizing it a different way, saying, I didn't vote for, it wasn't a ban, I voted to allow it up to 20, 22, 24 weeks. I know that there are some people who feel like, okay, well, if you're allowing it up to a certain point, you're banning it after that point. And that's where, so many of the challenges that we hear from people who are facing healthcare crises, who are struggling to get work. And a lot of these issues are multi-layered issues. So it's not quite as simple as, well, we have the right. There are issues of just availability. We're losing OBGYNs, we're losing healthcare workers. We lost an OBGYN center here in Capitol Hill, where now the closest one is in Bellevue. So there are people just concerned about access and availability. And then there are things like 2/3 of the hospitals in the state are religious hospitals, and they can choose, they sometimes have chosen, to not provide abortion care. Governor Inslee did sign an executive order to that degree, but there is, talk in the legislature about the Keep Our Care Act to ensure that even if a hospital is religious, they provide care. But I think there are multiple layers, and it's really going to be interesting to see how voters interpret his position there and whether that is sufficient for them or not. I can go on if you want.
Thank you for your offering. Yeah, and I want to thank the candidates for coming too. And you may have noted that they came and they went. Right? So just to give you a sense of where I'm kind of coming from, you heard my introduction. I manage a organization in Rainier Beach. We essentially are urban planners, kind of in organizers' clothing. Or sometimes organizers in urban planners' clothing, but my history is in nonprofit executive management, youth development, and really working to support the most vulnerable in our neighborhood, in our community. And so here we are in Rainier Valley, okay? And that's a reference that was probably really important to have been made by them that really didn't get made, because there's a perspective coming from Rainier Valley that needs to be captured and understood by our elected officials. And I'll speak to some of that. So there was some reference to how would we support Black boys and their education. And we heard this high-level reference to how that would happen. And I would tell you, Black boys, if you ask them about that, they would say, well, no, that's not what you do. How about considering an African-American curriculum across the state of Washington, and how some of us may think about, when you say African-American curriculum, oh yeah, that will only affect Black boys. No, that's going to affect our white kids. That's going to affect our Asian kids. That's going to affect our indigenous community. They will learn more about this culture. They will learn more about Black boys and understand the creativity, ingenuity that comes not only just from them, but also from the heritage that they come from. So that's probably something that they would say. And so I'm seeing that as one of the things that I'm up here for, to kind of speak into. There was also some reference to the grassroots campaign, and I'm not sure if that grassroots campaign dips deep enough to where youth voice is actually part of that grassroots campaign. Our young people have a very keen, and when I say young people, we're talking about, I'm talking about high school, college age, and it's very important that their voice is involved in this work. I did appreciate the reference to domestic violence. This is, in fact, Domestic Violence Awareness Month. But one of the things that we heard the candidate say, candidate Riker say, was that he had no power to do certain things. You know, that's probably a non-starter for us. Somebody who's in the governor's position says they have no power then, it's really tough to consider them very seriously. We say, well, you have the power to convene at the very least. You have the power to call for task force at the very least. I did appreciate his reference to the covenant homeownership program, and that is something that addresses that issue about the race gap, the racial wealth gap. Let's get us into homeownership. Let's get us into developing equity. Let's get young people through the Covenant Homeownership Act who are just graduating from college the ability to own a home. It's not going to be the white picket fence, full backyard kind of home, but it will be an opportunity for them to start developing equity, and they can always level up. So I'll leave it there because I was kind of given a little time frame to respond to. So thank you.
When it comes to progressive revenue or thinking about a system where people who earn very high incomes, are paying a higher percentage than people who make very low incomes. We are not the last place when it comes to people, a regressive state, but we're kind of low. And you heard Bob Ferguson talk about being in favor of the capital gains tax, those initiatives. Obviously, Bob Ferguson is going to be voting no on all of them. Where you heard Dave Reichert suggest that he's against income taxes. He's talked again before about not being in favor of a capital gains tax, which is doing some to fund education, childcare, those types of things. So that's a significant difference between them. When it did come to housing, someone who asked that housing question, you heard him kind of say, oh, the state's coming in and trying to have control what cities are doing. And that's a difference in perspective, I think, between Dave Reichert and Bob Ferguson, where some cities have been very hesitant to do anything to absorb more housing, and the state has, in their estimation, had to come in and say, you're going to have to meet your growth targets. Very different between them. And then on the issue, I think, interestingly, just on bureaucracy, you heard Bob Ferguson mention that, there are some areas in the state that there could have been a better job in management. And I think that's a very accurate observation. I mean, we've seen the Department of Children, Families, and Youth being in quite a bit of trouble. We've seen our state prisons being in very poor condition, the Supreme Court having to come in and mandate what they're doing, people who have mental health issues being not taken care of or held beyond their sentence. And those seem like issues of management. There are lots of issues of staffing and in different departments. So I think the job of the governor, the executive, the CEO of the state is to fix those kinds of issues. And so I think it is a good thing that doesn't always come up in these races to hear that acknowledged and to know that he's interested in working on them. Because frankly, that's an area that Republicans frequently attack Democrats on, and sometimes there's work to be done.
Thank you. And there was just a couple of other comments that I heard that I wanted to try to speak to. And it was interesting, the candidate Riker talked about his prowess as a detective. And, that may be in our community, at least I'll speak for myself, probably one of the redeeming qualities of our police force is their ability to detect, not necessarily enforce, but not in the governor's office. That's not what we're looking for in our governor's office, is someone who's going to uncover challenges, but as you heard Crystal say, really focus on solving some problems. I did hear something promising from candidate Ferguson, looking at construction as a way to support economic development, and that's one of the other opportunities for closing the racial wealth gap. There's an initiative here in Seattle called Priority Hire, where we organized because in Rainier Beach, the community center was being demolished and rebuilt, and there was no one local on that construction project. In fact, they hired somebody from Tacoma. And so what we got put in place here in Seattle is an ordinance where you had to have on any City of Seattle capital construction project, 25% of the workforce needs to come from the most underinvested in zip codes. So let's look at that as an opportunity to spread across the state, where underinvested communities can get involved in the construction trade, because we know how that is kind of played out to this day, referred to as FBI, where the workforce hire their fathers, brothers, and in-laws, and not the people of color who are aspiring to earn a living wage and to develop a skill in the trade such as that. So you get an opportunity to look that up. Priority hire is something that you can consider asking our candidates to promote.
And they will be back too. So let's get to our second portion of the program. And since I go through my paperwork here so I get my introductions correct. Thank you again for coming. Oh, I'm good, I found it. Actually, I need these probably more than anything, right? We have, first we're going to have Nick Brown and then Pete Serrano will come up. And so I want to do a brief introduction. Mr. Brown. Nick Brown has served as the United States Attorney for the Western District of Washington from October 2021 to June 21st, 2023. Brown received his Bachelor of Arts degree from Morehouse College in 1999 and his Juris Doctor from Harvard University in 2002. So let's have a big round of applause for Mr. Nick Brown.
Thank you, everyone, for, first of all, to the hosts for putting this together and giving candidates the opportunity to speak and be heard. And 1 month from today is Election Day. And so all of us are going to start getting ballots in just a couple weeks, and your voices and your participation matter a lot. What I'd like to do is just tell you a little bit about myself and how I got to be at this place of advocating for myself to be the next Attorney General for the state of Washington. And being 30 days out from a campaign, it's a little bit surreal to be at that stage, to be standing up and advocating for myself to be the lawyer for the people of the state of Washington. But principally, I think I'm able to be here because of my parents, who always pushed me to be engaged in the community. I grew up in Washington, in Pierce County. Both my parents were military veterans and public servants and pushed me to be caring about the community, curious about the community. And so growing up, I was that kid trying to find a way to participate in my community. And I took that foundation and followed my parents' lead into the military to go off to Morehouse College on an Army ROTC scholarship to pay for my undergrad, and then law school at Harvard, and started my legal career as an Army JAG lawyer, serving on active duty as an Army soldier, working with soldiers and families all across America, all across the world, including a year spent in Baghdad, Iraq during the height of the Iraqi war, where I was deployed and defending soldiers who were serving abroad. I came back to here and joined the Department of Justice, working on complex criminal cases for about 6 years, fraud cases, identity theft, bank fraud, when the mortgage industry collapsed in 2007, 2008, prosecuting those cases, but spent most of my time principally as a violent crime prosecutor, working on how do we keep people safe and addressing drug trafficking, gun violence, crimes against children, working with our tribal nations all throughout Western Washington. But I'd always had an interest in policy and politics and was hired by Governor Inslee at the beginning of his first term to serve as his general counsel and work down in Olympia. And for me, that was a real important change in perspective, because as soon as I got to Olympia, I just realized that all of the things that I most thought about, the quality of my kids' education, taxes, public safety, transportation, healthcare, that most of those decisions are not being decided in Washington, D.C. Most of the things that impact your lives, impact my lives, happen at a state and local level. And I had not been paying much attention until I got down to Olympia and really saw the impact that the legislators were having, that the governor was having, and the attorney general was having. And the last 6 months of my time with Governor Inslee were the first 6 months of the Trump administration, which from my perspective was a very unsettling time. And I remember when the Trump travel ban came out, which attempted to prohibit people of Muslim faith from entering this community, and what it was like for Washington to stand up and oppose that. And I remember being closely engaged with the Attorney General's office on that litigation, working with them to see what Washington State could do to change the arc of history and to protect people, and was so proud to play a role in that litigation. And then I came back to Seattle, worked at a private law firm that does public sector litigation on behalf of governments and nonprofits and some companies, and then became the United States Attorney for Western Washington, the first black person in Washington State history to have that job. And I loved being U.S. Attorney, to lead a large public law firm, principally focused on how do we keep people safe from the fentanyl crisis, from fraud cases, from violence, and doing all we could to defend people's civil rights. I was honored to serve as the chair of the Civil Rights Subcommittee for all of the United States attorneys in the country to figure out what we could do to address hate crimes and hold people accountable for who commit that kind of misconduct. But I decided to step down to run for Attorney General because it's an immensely important office. It impacts your lives in a myriad of ways. And I principally see the job as being the advocate for the people of the state of Washington, to be your advocate around consumer protection, civil rights, environmental protection, protecting abortion access and health care, and to make sure that we can be an advocate for people who don't often have a voice in places of power. And I'm excited about leading the best law firm that we can. It's a huge office with 800 lawyers, 800 staff members, and it's an immense responsibility. But I think my background as a lawyer and a leader and my values make me uniquely qualified to take on this responsibility. And I'd be encouraged by everyone's support and look forward to the questions from the panels. Thank you very much.
Nothing about us without us was a good way to frame where we're at in the previously incarcerated community and the currently incarcerated community. What I want to know is, how is the proposed or the running AG candidates going to impact the money flying out of the taxpayers' pockets due to no preemptive effort to stop the harm DOC is doing in the prisons? If even their oversight stopped publishing ethical and accurate reports, what do you plan on doing?
So I spent a lot of my time when I was counsel to Governor Inslee working on issues directly with Department of Corrections. And it sounds like you may have heard from the prior candidates as well for governor that there are a myriad of areas that we need to improve on across state government. And from my vantage point, DOC may be one of the most important ones. I interfaced with them on a couple of different important ways. When I was Governor Inslee's counsel, I was the principal person on his staff responsible for all of the clemency and pardon work on behalf of the governor. And I was really proud of the work that he did to lean into that opportunity. My fundamental belief is that everybody deserves a shot at redemption, and we really leaned into that, and I'm proud of the work that Governor Inslee did. I led the governor's effort to put an end to the death penalty here in Washington State. It was literally a project that I started working on my first day in the job to change a practice that I felt was unjust, and was proud of what he did around that area. But time and time again, I came across issues with the Department of Corrections in terms of their treatment of people incarcerated, their ability to interface with family members of people incarcerated, and there's just a whole host of issues. And our system needs a lot of improvement. The principal job of the Attorney General, I think, is twofold in this space. One, Department of Corrections will be one of my clients. So every state government agency is represented by the Attorney General's office. And so it is our obligation to provide the best legal advice that we can provide them. But it's important for me that we not simply be focused on handling an individual case or matter in front of us, but we do everything we can to help the agency problem solve and reduce harm. And this is not unique to the Department of Corrections, but because of their people in our care and custody, I think it's a particularly high ethical obligation to do that. And so it's just going to have to be leaning in to make sure that we help them problem solve, working with the new governor's office around those issues. The accountability for their programs and the dollars they spent is going to be very important. I think to empower the DOC ombudsperson is also going to be a very important obligation, because they are an independent advocate for both people who are incarcerated and family members. And it's a way that the executive branch can help identify problems at a higher level. But I want to make sure that I can do everything I can to advocate beyond simply representing my client for improvement about how we run our systems and how we treat people that are incarcerated, and make sure that we're holding people accountable but not ignoring their humanity. And I think that's a really important obligation of the AG moving forward.
Thank you very much. Next question is, Will you pursue laws that criminalize protest, as Bob Ferguson did in joining 21 states who were disappointingly restricting our First Amendment?
You know, I'm going to be honest, I'm not specifically aware of the case that's behind that question. And so I'm not sure that I can weigh in fully on that issue. But let me say this. Protest is one of the uniquely American tools of achieving justice. My father grew up in Columbia, South Carolina during the height of the civil rights movement in the wake of Jim Crow. My father went to jail because of his participation in protests in the South as a young college student. So much of the civil rights movement is founded by young people who are having their voices heard. And it's a part of our democracy building that I think we need to be very careful of guarding against. We see, however, times where that protest can lead to problems, and protest can lead to hate, and can lead indeed to violations. It's not my obligation nor my desire or how I see my role to criminalize protest, but we need to make sure that protest is done in a manner that does not infringe on other people's rights and keeps everyone safe as well.
I have a few more questions. Thank you very much. What do you believe the AG's role is in expanding deferral programs that are community-based and work to keep people out of the mass incarceration system?
Well, let me say a few different things. First and foremost, a lot of people think of the Attorney General as the chief cop or chief prosecutor for the state. And the role is often defined as being the chief law enforcement officer for the state of Washington, and it is. But there's a very little segment of the job that actually involves prosecuting individual cases. The Attorney General does not have authority to prosecute cases unless two things happen. One, unless a county prosecutor asks the Attorney General's office to handle those cases, or two, if the governor makes that request. We've seen a lot of that in recent years, particularly in the latter category, as we investigate alleged crimes of police misconduct. The governor has often requested the Attorney General's office to handle those cases. And then there's a very narrow brand of cases involving sexually violent predators that the AG's office has direct responsibility around. But even in that space, it's important that the AG's office be engaged and helping the legislature craft policy, and also be engaged with the local resources, both community and law enforcement, to see how we can be a value add. So many of the problems that we have here around public safety, the default public reaction is police and prosecutions. And I do believe that's a very important part of the tool, but it's a very temporary part of the tool. The things that make safety sustainable, in my mind, are things like housing and jobs and education and a system that addresses people's mental health problems or drug addiction problems. Those are the things that make safety sustainable, because 97% of the people that we incarcerate in Washington state prisons are gonna get out one day. And we need to spend as much time and energy on thinking about how do we keep people from entering our system in the first place, and how do we help people when they get out of prison. If we're solely focused on law enforcement and prosecutors, and that's a world that I've lived in for much of my career, but if we only think of that as the tool around public safety, we're going to continue these cycles of mass incarceration. And so much of what I hear these days is we simply need to get tougher on crime, et cetera. We need to hold people accountable, but we need to build systems that make communities safer and sustainable moving forward.
All right, thank you. Last question. What additional consumer protections would you advocate Washington State adopt?
Well, you know, it's interesting. The Consumer Protection Act and the Consumer Protection Division of the Attorney General's office is the area where most of the public here in Washington interfaces with. You don't often deal with the Attorney General's office, but if you've been impacted by a company that's having misleading business practices, or a company that is having you in contracts that are hard to get out of, or any sort of private enterprise that is misleading particularly vulnerable populations, this is where the AG's office can be very, very powerful. And I'm really proud of the legacy that's been built over not just the last Attorney General, but the last few Attorney Generals. You know, my entry into law school was when AG Gregoire, who then became governor, was still Attorney General, and she had just come off a national litigation around tobacco and really improved public health and held people accountable. And also, the Attorney General's office is one of the few, I think the only division in state government that makes money for the public. And we do that because of the Consumer Protection Act. So every time that the AG's office sues a company on your behalf and gets money back, that money goes back to the taxpayer to pay salaries in the Attorney General's office and sometimes directly back to consumers. So you think about the opioid crisis that we've had here in Washington State, and A.G. Ferguson and his colleagues across the country brought many, many lawsuits against the manufacturers of opioids and returned hundreds of millions of dollars back to communities all across the country, including those here in Washington State. And we need to be really aggressive in this space. The one new area, or the area that I think we need to be more focused on, is around housing. No matter where I go here in Washington State, housing comes up as a problem, whether that's in Seattle or Spokane or small communities all throughout Western and Eastern Washington. Housing is at a crisis level. And by the way, we're scheduled to add another 1 million or so people in the next 10, 15 years. And so the housing crisis that we're facing now is going to get exponentially worse. And unless we're really laser focused on treating this as a crisis that it is, it's going to get worse. And so I'd love to see the AG's office lean heavily into the housing space in 3 particular areas. One is around using the Consumer Protection Act to make sure we're combating some of the consolidation and price fixing schemes that we're seeing here in Washington. We've seen some of those cases arise now, but we need to be better at it. 2, I want to empower the Civil Rights Division of the Attorney General's office to do everything we can to make sure that either renters or buyers are free from discrimination, and that is still a massive problem here in Washington. And 3, to make sure that we're doing everything we can to empower the AG's office to protect renters and tenants. The Landlord-Tenant Act is separate from the Consumer Protection Act because of a Supreme Court from the 1980s, but I'd love to see us be more engaged in that space to make sure we're protecting people who are struggling to get by to pay their rent for their apartments, their homes, or whatever.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, we are winding down, and we have Pete Serrano coming up in a moment. Just a little bit about Mr. Serrano's professional experience includes working as an attorney for the U.S. Department of Energy. He earned a bachelor's degree from the University of California, Davis, and a law degree from Florida Coastal School of Law. Let's have a warm welcome for Mr. Pete Serrano.
Thank you and good evening. Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to the opportunity of discussing the issues that are on our minds. A little bit of background about me is I've practiced law for 15 years. And in that 15 years, I've stood for the people, whether it's the people of Washington or the people of the United States. First lawsuit of my career was suing the United States Environmental Protection Agency on behalf of a small community in the middle of nowhere, Iowa. Why did we sue them? Because they passed laws without, or passed rules and regulations without advising the people that it was going to cost this little 10,000 person county $40 million to retrofit a water station. What was the benefit? It was 1 in 1,000th microliters of getting certain constituents out of the water. Fundamentally, no benefit, except costing these people basically all their bonding ability that would have occurred over the next 10 years to get this project. And EPA shoved that rule down their throat. They had no opportunity to comment. When our government forces rules and regulations upon us without our consent, there's a huge problem. Right now, we're seeing the effects of those problems. We're seeing the effects of rules and regulations that run far beyond what agencies should have. As the Attorney General, it'll be my duty to advise those agencies what their parameters and bounds are. Okay, excuse me, hey, if you're 3 inches, but you're 8 inches out, we got a serious problem. Perfect examples, we've had a lot of rulemaking. Early in my time in Pasco, it was mid-pandemic, and we saw the Liquor Cannabis Board making rules and regulations that they would then be able to enforce in perpetuity about enforcing any governor's proclamation. Why does the Liquor Cannabis Board need that authority? It may have been appropriate, and I'm not going to suggest it was, but it may have been appropriate to do certain things differently in the middle of the pandemic. But why is this rule going to last forever? And so that really opened my eyes to the importance of watching our government and keeping it in check. For the past 7 years, I've been on Pasco City Council, and now I'm currently the mayor. Every Monday night, I show up to a meeting with the weight of 80,000 people on my shoulders. Every decision I make is going to cost or benefit, or hopefully benefit, but it's going to cost my community something. It may be an investment. It may be a decision to make a decision to fund Project A or Project B, but there's always a cost-benefit analysis. I felt the weight of the voice of the people, and I continually feel it. As your Attorney General, have the unique experience of being the one who's been elected to a position, especially such a weighty position as Mayor Pasco. The Attorney General's office serves the people of Washington, and I believe it's lost great sight of that. It's unfortunate that we're seeing the advice to expand agency regulation, to advise the legislature just to stay in lockstep with it under the current administration. So it's time that we get someone who's willing to tell the agencies as well as the legislature what their duties are. Remind them of the people's voice. When we're not hearing it, when they're not hearing our voice, it's highly problematic and we lose our rights. So it's time for us to find a change. It's time for us to find a change in Washington. And I look forward to being your voice, representing you in Olympia as the advisor to these agencies and the legislature, and defending your rights in court. And I'm Pete Serrano, running for Attorney General. You can find me at serrano4ag.com. That's SERRANOFORAG.com. Appreciate any questions. Look forward to hearing from you.
All right, don't go away.
Oh, no. I'm sticking around.
All right, so we have some questions out there. Any? You guys are all, your hands, you got writer's cramp, right? Well, I have a question, actually.
Sure, let's do it.
And it has to do with public safety.
Oh.
Are you going to give me something over there? Yeah. Okay. Well, my question is about public safety, because you hear a lot about crime and businesses having to leave downtown Seattle, and then we hear about hiring more police officers and having stricter laws and things like that. How do you, if you were elected, how would you approach the public safety question or issue?
Yeah, I think that's all part of it. Part of it, too, is the conversation with the business owners, understanding why they left. You know, some left mid-pandemic because, quite frankly, they didn't need commercial space in particular. No one was going into work. There's no question that having a law that's both, one of the things that we're seeing is an issue with, like, for example, police reform. The Attorney General's office is the one who rewrote or wrote the use of force policy. When I talk to the police agencies, they've told me, we don't know what this means. It's so conditional, and there are so many different variations of how to interpret it, that the AG's office needs to give clear guidance. And so I think that's one way in which we can work to engage both the community and the policing community and bring people together to really have a deep understanding of what the use of force policy should be and how it should be interpreted to protect the community and allow police to actually do their jobs. So I think that's one of the key elements. I do think there are certain laws and ordinances. You know, again, in Pasco, we had an issue where we had a lot of homeless people blockading, sleeping in front of businesses. Those businesses suffered tremendously. A lot of these people were first-generation Americans coming over in particular from Mexico. That's where our large population of immigrants is in Pasco. Under those circumstances, you know, they didn't have a fair shot to succeed. And so we've been fortunate that under the U.S. Supreme Court, there have been some decisions that have allowed for cities to do a little bit more with the homeless population, to disperse them and find other places. And so with that, you know, I think there's a lot of intersection between policymaking, both at the local level and working on a larger scale with local police departments.
Thank you. In keeping with the public safety theme, the next question is, you recently published a video where you suggested transit in Seattle was unsafe and talked about being uncomfortable because a black man was sitting on a bench. There was a backlash calling it racist. How do you respond to that?
Sure, I appreciate that. I mean, first, I didn't say I was uncomfortable. It was the woman I was with that expressed that discomfort. I've ridden the transit in Italy, I've ridden it in DC Metro, I've ridden it in San Francisco, and I've ridden it here. So I have no issues there. There had nothing to do with the individual being black. What happened was I was talking to the woman, and the camera behind me panned, and there was a gentleman sitting on the bench, and from what I understood, he appeared homeless. And so this notion that it had to do with the individual's race is absolutely insane. It's incorrect. It's a fallacy, doesn't represent me. And so, and folks will say, well, why didn't you respond? I wasn't really interested in responding to folks that won't listen.
Okay. We have a few more questions, and I have a question for the person who gave me this, because I can't read one word. It says, I got to get my prescription changed, right? How do you plan on, and this is the word, something, the voices of the communities you serve? Is that centering? Okay.
Can you restate that?
Oh, yeah, I am. I'm going to
Okay,
start
thank
all
you.
over again. How do you plan on centering the voices of the communities you serve? We all don't have the same needs or ideas of safety or security.
Yeah, I've talked about this a lot. The Attorney General's office serves 13 physical offices, all the way from Clark County up and down the I-5 corridor, up to Bellingham, over to Spokane, and then down to Pullman, right? With the opportunity to visit each one of those 13 offices and places in between, I will have the opportunity to speak with those communities. My goal, my plan, is to visit each one of those campuses. And at that time, I'd love to host town halls. So for the first 13 weeks, plan to go out and visit those various satellite offices, if you will. And then the next 13 weeks come back, and during that time, I'd love to hear from the community. So I think the only way to really center that voice is to listen to that voice, and then come back and adopt policies and make some decisions based on what's heard. So that's how I'll center those voices.
Thank you. Last question is, what additional consumer protections would you advocate for on behalf of the people of Washington State?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest issues, and it's kind of a dovetailing one, is one, making sure that we have a really strong cybercrime unit, and then two, making sure that we protect our elderly folks. And I say those go in tandem because a lot of the elderly folks, I look at my parents, they really struggle to use the internet, their phones, and they get, they prey to scams. Fortunately, my parents aren't. But, that's what I hear is the most common thing is, hey, look, my mom, my grandmother received an email or a text, and then she texted, and now money's out of her account. So when I look at the issue of the cyber crimes, look at the money that was lost by our state during the COVID pandemic, billions with a B of dollars. Start at the 1.17 that was found to be missing by our auditor. And then there was what they called, the Nigerian scammer, which was literally our department, I believe it was our auditor, lost about $600 million, or Secretary of State, lost $600 million of pandemic funds to a scam. If our government can get scammed out of nearly $2 billion or misplace it, you and I are prey to the same people. And we don't have the defenses or resources of the state that should have. I'm not going to say it does, because obviously if they've got it, they're not fail-proof. So the opportunity to really advocate for vulnerable populations, those who are just coming online, whether it's due to being in the rural area, lack of internet resources and internet in the intercity, or in the inner city, or being elderly, I think those two things are going to dovetail, really hyper-focused on cyber crimes and as well as focused on our elderly population.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And now we're going to spend about 20 minutes wrapping it up with the commentators, and I'll let you take it away, and looking forward to what you have to say.
Well, I suppose just following up on what Mr. Serrano just said about cybercrimes, I hope that also includes the cyber attacks that we've seen at places like the Seattle Public Library, Highline School District. We've had state agencies attacked, several in the past year. And I know every time I see one of those, I'm wondering, are they left to just deal with that themselves? The library was impacted for months. The Highline School District is still being impacted. I have family members there, and they're still down in many ways. It seems like that's a very big challenge that our government is facing. All of these individual entities, I don't know if there's a coordinated response, but that, I hope, was something that can shine some more light on that there's a focus on that. That was interesting. I did find it interesting to hear the perspective in his candidate Serrano's response to I guess, the uproar and backlash about the video that he posted with the black man that to most people, to me certainly didn't look homeless, but that was the interpretation there. I do think hearing from candidate Nick Brown about housing is really important, something on a lot of people's minds, talking about having a much bigger focus on that, being a convener in that way, and also focusing on renter protections and tenant protections, which are passing across the state and cities. Interestingly, in the city of Seattle, they're talking about rolling back a lot of the existing renter protections. It's an issue in this upcoming council race. It's some existing council members have talked about that. So interesting to hear the differences there, and maybe statewide regulations are going to override whatever the city does or doesn't decide to do. Those were some of the differences that I just heard today, or some of the notable things that I heard today. What did you think?
One of the things that I wanted to say before I even started talking before is that I saw a documentary on John Lewis, and so I'm channeling John Lewis to this space. But I liked the reference to by candidate Brown about the opportunity for redemption. Interested, though, in making sure that they are familiar with this book that I read. It's called Don't Shoot One Man's, David Kennedy, and he's actually a Harvard graduate researcher, where he talked about the violence, gang violence, violence in our communities, and how the Attorney General's office, though, has an opportunity to bring together all of the law enforcement agencies, to actually bring together the folks in our communities that are the shooters and their folks who are in periphery to them, and to create an opportunity not only to just incarcerate, but the opportunity to give them an opportunity for redemption. And it talks about what they're looking for are jobs, and you heard that. They're looking for housing, they're looking for an economic opportunity, they're looking for health. And so there's a way that we can bring all of these forces together, not to just prosecute, but to give opportunity for redemption if they happen to be in periphery of some of the more egregious folks committing crimes. Yeah, they probably need to serve their time, and then, yeah, when they get out, they can be given opportunity. But those who are kind of caught in the web and are wind up being having their lives changed because of that, there is a path to that, and I think the Attorney General's office can do that. I thought I appreciated hearing the reference to the role of consumer protection, that the money, the office actually makes money. And so where does the money go? There's something that we asked the city of Seattle about when they sought to sell a building right across the street from City Hall. What are you going to do with the money? We said, organizations in the area said, help Black-led organizations purchase property with that money and create housing with that money. It's called the Equitable Development Initiative. And so there are like 74 projects now where folks of color, Black-led organizations have grants from the city of Seattle to be able to purchase land and to be able to develop that land. So it would be great if this money that our dear Attorney General's office is able to make for the city to have some use that goes into that path, into that direction. I did like hearing about the housing renter protection. There was a community policy brief that Rainier Beach Action Coalition, the multicultural community Puget Sound SABJ wrote that's called disaster gentrification. And some of the policy proposals that we have in there are things like to prevent affordable housing from going to private real estate firms and developers. Pass a Tenant Community Opportunity to Purchase Act. So if the owner is looking to sell that property, give the tenants the right of first refusal to purchase that, so that they can retain their home ownership, their housing. So that's called the disaster gentrification in King County, and so that's something that we want to encourage our candidates to read, have them read more things about that's what's relating to the communities that are really being impacted. The last one I'll say is, the focus on cyber crimes in the elderly. I would have liked to also have heard an equal amount of time spent on the impact that the internet has on our young people and the challenges that they face, particularly coming out of COVID, and the mental health issues that are related to an overuse of access to the internet, and not so much access to the internet, but the impact of the internet on their mind. So yes, elderly is important, cyber crimes are important, but also the impact of that on our young people needed to be included.
I also really appreciated candidate Nick Brown's mention of prevention of crime, and that being a critical element of public and community safety, because so often the conversations that we hear, especially from candidates, are focused on hiring police, jailing people, which is incredibly expensive. And then we can talk about how effective or not effective it is. But we're talking about massive budget cuts in the school district and the city at all levels of government, and we're piling on more with that. Preventing people from being harmed in the first place is always preferable to having someone be harmed and then try and hold someone accountable after the fact. And we have a lot of evidence about what does prevent crime. There's so many, reports, there's so many studies, there's so many resources out there that are available for people to see. And that do provide a return that we see in our communities. And so I think that's a very important focus, that when we talk about safety, that isn't equated to just cops. It's really about preventing people from being harmed, and how we invest. And then in times when we are making cuts, when we are looking at prioritizing in budgets and in investments, where do we cut and what kind of impact is that going to have? Are we, taking one step forward and two steps back because we're moving backwards in prevention and more people wind up being harmed? So I just really appreciated hearing that. And then I think just overall, some reminders. Voting is absolutely important. I do encourage people to vote. One of the cool things that you can do is sign up for ballot tracking here in King County. They'll text you when your ballot's mailed. When you send it back, they'll be like, yep, we received it. And then when they match your signature, they'll be like, yep, we matched your signature, it's gonna be counted. That's very helpful because a lot of people get surprised. There's a number of people who, they signed their driver's license when they were 16, never thought about it again, and then you have to match your signature to that when you're, 20, 30, 40, 50 years old, and then it doesn't match. And then it's, not counted. And you also get a notification if that happens. So make sure you register to vote, sign up for some ballot alerts, and make sure your ballot is actually counted. And another reminder that we're talking about people coming back in society. Felons can vote here in Washington State. And we actually, in the state, passed a couple years ago some additional reforms so that in a lot of other states, there's someone at my mom's church who didn't know this the other day who had a felony conviction way back when, that you don't have to be done serving probation, you don't have to, be a certain amount of years out. As soon as you're not in custody anymore, as soon as you're not locked in a prison, you can register to vote again and vote. Your right is automatically restored, but you do have to actually register again. So that's available for people, spread the word. And then there's a lot of people, and it's a wonderful thing. We all talk about how important voting is and, posting online and putting it in the group chat and everybody's like, yay. But the most important thing you can do is check in with your close friends and your close family. Hit up your cousins, hit up your aunties and your uncles, and the people in your neighborhood, hit up your neighbor and be like, hey, did you get your ballot in? That has proven to be more influential on whether people actually vote than just about anything else. It's just someone they know and they trust saying, hey, did you get that done? So I just encourage people to do that because not just federally, local races are so important. We just had a Commissioner of Public Lands race be decided by 51 votes out of about 2 million. So these races often are very close, and so I just encourage everyone to make sure you and everyone you know is going to vote.
A couple of things that I'll also say in terms of what I heard. In our communities, when we hear the word public safety, we think about that as more protection of buildings than people. So I'd like us to consider adopting either a companion phrase or even a better reference phrase of community safety. And I'll give you an example. In Rainier Beach, we were having some calls from neighbors hearing noises from a local park. And our institution's first reaction in the name of public safety was to put a gate on the park to prevent people from being able to use it. And what our approach is, particularly at the Rainier Beach Action Coalition and in Rainier Beach, was, well, these people who calls are being made on, why don't we train them to be community safety specialists? So when they are in the park, they are also taking a responsibility for the safety of the people in the park and themselves. And so that's a focus on people, not on just enforcement. So that's something I just want us to consider. I'll say too that we do need to be hyper vigilant in our encouraging young people to vote. If we were to use the tenor of the current political campaign state as a basis for a decision to vote or not, none of us would be voting because it's almost not, what was the phrase I had? It's not the lesser of two evils, it's the evil of two lessers that tends to be the choice. So we got to be hyper vigilant in making sure that our young people vote. So if you've got nieces and nephews, children, grandchildren that are of the voting age, we have to give them, we have to double down on their voting. You heard the example of a race that just was a handful of votes that made the difference. And we have to engage them in that way because they have an experience coming out of COVID, seeing the current political climate, imagining it's one of doom. And they are our hope. We need them to be engaged. So this is my challenge to you from the platform that I've been given at this table, is to be hyper vigilant in supporting our young people, getting them to understand the importance of it. Talk to them about John Lewis and the challenges that he's gone to preserve the vote. Talk to them about the onslaught against the Voting Rights Act. And it's really going to be really important, particularly this campaign cycle, for all of them to do that. So thank you very much for listening and being part of the work here.
And I just want to say one other thing. I am so thankful to the Seattle Association of Black Journalists for putting this on. It is so important to have opportunities to hear directly from candidates. We've lost so much local media around the state that we have a lot less coverage than we used to. And there's a lot less accountability than there used to be from candidates. And to have opportunities where people can directly ask questions and get answers to what is concerning you is just a really valuable thing. So I just really appreciate this event, the opportunity to be here. Very, very appreciative.
Well, I want to thank Gregory Davis and Crystal Fincher for being here. Another round of applause. It's really nice to be able to hear the candidates, but then to also get you to frame it, you know, and I'm hoping that even though we didn't have a lot of time today, that it's kind of it's opened a door to more thought, deeper thought about the issues as well. And also, I know that I'm more motivated now to try and make a difference because I think, and make a difference with my vote, because I think it's very easy to get discouraged and frustrated and even cynical. And I'm glad you brought up the thing about the media as well, because 30, 40 years ago when I first moved up here, there was a lot more robust media, and nowadays I know that people are frustrated just trying to find out what the truth is. It can just be very daunting sometimes for a number of reasons. So again, if anyone wants to stay in touch, get on our mailing list, find out about more activities and programs and events that Seattle Association of Black Journalists is putting on. Or you might even have suggestions for topics as well. You might see things out in the community and you go, wow, I'd love to see a panel on that topic. Please contact us. You can leave your business cards. I don't know if we have a mailing list or a guest list that could be signed, but just make sure that you stay in touch with us. And thank you for coming out on a kind of a cold, gray day. So take care and be safe out there.